co-founder of DLA Ignite. I'm joined today with Eric Stine. Eric's actually been on here before, so there's only a very few. You're in a select group, Eric. There's very few people that have come on here twice.
I feel like Sally Field winning her second Academy Award. You like me, Tim. You really like me.
And what we're going to talk about today is leadership, and how life informs your leadership. So we're going to talk about work-life balance and work-life harmony, and we're going to talk about how as leaders we should be our best selves, something I think that all of us want to do. I certainly I'm always looking for ways to be a better leader, and I'm just smiling about some leadership I did earlier today.
You should share.
Don't
tell the story.
No. I went back to the beginning. It was one of those things where you put your caveman
back to the foundations.
Sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes you have to do that. Eric, before we get in, tell people where they can get hold of you.
Where can you find me? So you can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to find me. I think you've got my link in today's chat.
It will be in the show notes on YouTube, definitely. Yes.
That's always the best way.
You're the only Eric Stine on LinkedIn, if I remember.
I'm the only one spelled Stine.
Yes.
So it makes me really, really easy to find. And if you want to connect directly from there, you can just send me a direct message. I answer all of my mail, even when I'm not interested in whatever you are selling, promoting, reacting to. I will always respond to you courteously.
So you've been in loads of very high profile leadership roles, under a lot of pressure, having people report to you from around the world, so different time zones. I've run teams where you've got people, and you end up having to run team meetings at 3:00 in the morning for somebody, because it is for in somewhere in the world it's 3:00 in the morning,
right?
And everybody else is working, and you have got to do all these different things. And I know that you hate the phrase work-life balance. What does this all mean to you when you're running a team and you're having to think about all of these different elements coming together, because they even come together before you're trying to get people to do the things they need to do?
I really love that opening, Tim. We could spend the whole show and probably the time allotted to 2 more talking about this topic. I don't believe in work-life balance. I think it's bullshit. Can I say that on the air?
You said it.
Is there somebody out there who can bleep me? I don't believe in work-life balance. I believe in work-life integration. I think it is first and foremost your responsibility to set those boundaries and to clarify what work-life integration means for you. And I think it's the responsibility of leaders to not just listen for it, but to look for it. It's a little bit embarrassing to me. So my husband and I have been together for 20 years.
Wow! Congratulations!
Thank you very much. Today is the 5th. 1 week from today, it will be our 16th wedding anniversary. We've been together 20 years, married 16. I have a neurodiverse son. I have led global teams for 11 years. And one of the things I always look for in any new leadership situation and on the teams that I lead are, what's our meeting cadence? How are we accommodating people who live in various locations around the world? And what is our blend of single people, people with young families, people who are empty nesters? I've looked at leadership teams and said, hey, 40% of our business comes from outside North America. Why is there only one person from outside North America on our leadership team?
Yeah.
As somebody who considers myself a diverse leader and a leader who's committed to diversity, I'm embarrassed sometimes by how DEI has been dumbed down to a handful of categories and doesn't really focus on, hey, are we having meetings when somebody's trying to get their kids off to school or get dinner on the table? Are we
have you ever been in a meeting where someone says something about it? There's something about diversity, and they go, "That ticks the box."
No, I have not.
Okay, for me, I find it.
I think if somebody said that in front of me, I'd probably be really offended.
Yes, and I find it really, really difficult when someone says, "Well, that ticks the box." Like, what? We're not ticking boxes.
The whole point of it, of inclusiveness, is that you're not managing to a list, that you're thinking with as wide a possible aperture of how do people feel about belonging on your team. And if that doesn't start with you as a leader, it's not going to flow downstream, because whatever happens at the top in any organization, this is true, whether you have 7 layers or 2, whatever happens at the top flows down, and it gets diluted when it flows down. So it's got to be the strongest on your team, because the teams beneath that are only going to feel it to a lesser degree. And so I'll give you an example. I was in one role where I was chief revenue officer. I had about 1,200 people on my team, global team, and the pandemic hit. And one of the things that it was important for us to do was to establish community. I had a team that was earlier in their career than any other team that I had ever led. The vast majority of my team had not been in the workforce during the events of September 11th and the mini recession that followed it. And a bare majority of my team had not been in the workforce through the financial crisis of September 08 through 2011, 2012.
Yeah.
And it was really important for us to establish community. One of the things we did was we had a weekly all hands call, just so people could talk about what was on their mind, what they were doing, how they were keeping busy. We featured customer stories, we featured new products. It pulled from all over the company, but it was focused on the go-to-market.
So I ran one, and I said, "There's no agenda."
Oh, that's great. I wish I had thought of that.
And I said, turn up and talk about whatever you want. Now, it always, because it's a business call, it always turned to work, about what people are doing. The salespeople hated it because they said there was no agenda.
What we found challenging about it, and this is probably the reason that you'll never see me, on stage on Broadway. You'll easily find me behind the scenes. We did it twice. It was Wednesdays at 10 a.m. Eastern and Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern.
Okay.
Because it was the only way we could accommodate every single person on the team. Yeah. We didn't want it to be first thing in the morning in the US, and we didn't want it to be too late in Europe. And so we hit the Midwest, the East Coast, Greenwich Mean Time, and Central European Time. And then at 6 o'clock at night, we were able to hit where our teams were, because they were primarily concentrated in ANZ or on the West Coast. I adapted that in the role that followed because I had a bigger team in India, and that was the concentration of my team in the APAC region. And so you need to give people the ability to integrate their work in their lives. You've got to be on the lookout for it. But the other reason I hate the concept of work-life balance, the other reason I think it's just a whole lot of hooey, is that people will work or not work as much as they want to, or as much as they feel motivated or inspired by what they're doing. And if things feel like an obligation, you're just going to get a lower quality work product, or you're going to get less productivity out from them. And I think what COVID did was it really ripped the Band-Aid off of, I really hate my job, or I hate showing up in the same place 5 days a week, but I don't want to lose community. And so maybe I'm willing to show up 3 days a week, but there need to be days where I can get my kids back and forth to basketball practice, or show up at the PTA meeting, or take my mom to her doctor's appointments. Yeah. And I now expect work to accommodate that because they expected me to work out of my home. They didn't pay a third of my rent for using my home as my office. In many cases, there were, equipment was a reactive situation. And so I think we have responsibilities as employer and as employee to take an equal role in what work-life integration looks like. And when we have valued members of our team for whom a different role that maybe is more suited to a different type of schedule or a different type of environment, then we have to figure out ways to accommodate that.
Yeah, we've got a comment here. Hopefully it's a silent E. I think you pronounce your name as Reed, but if I got it wrong, please let me know. And he says personal responsibility regarding work-life integration is key, Eric. The fact that you're driving this concept from the top down is very refreshing.
I also want to be clear about the other piece of it, because as somebody who leads large teams and who sits on executive teams, and I'm going to now share an idea that isn't very popular. I believe that certain roles do belong in an office. I believe that we do a disservice to teams like sales development or inside sales or digital marketing teams if there isn't a place for them to gather at least part of the time. And so it's our obligation to build into our budget either the cost of bringing a virtual and remote team together periodically, and for inside sales and SDR teams that they sit together in common physical locations at least a couple of days a week. Otherwise, they lose the experience of learning from each other or of having hands-on time with their manager. I don't think that they will get the necessary career development that we have a responsibility to provide to them as employers if we aren't making it clear that those are the rules of the game. And I think because we lived in this sort of flux for so long, we went from everything remote to a very hard cutover of coming back. I think we really need to communicate better what the expectations are by role and say, listen, if you're not willing to show up 5 days a week, 3 days a week, travel for a week, a month to a workshop or an enablement session, this job may not be for you. But we also have to understand that that may impact the size of the talent pool that we're going to access as a result of that.
Yeah, my partner's 28-year-old. When he was in roles during COVID, he lived in a small flat or apartment, as you would call it, where there wasn't. I mean, the only place that he could sit was his bedroom, which no one really likes to see behind you, like this unmade bed or anything like that. He wanted to go into the office for sociability. I mean, he's at an age in his 20s, he's at an age where he liked going out, meeting people, and then they go out for a drink afterwards. That was part of what he wanted from work. My partner, for example, there's nothing worse that she has that when they say, "Can you come for drinks afterwards?" She wants to come home, and so you have this thing, by where you live, by how old you are. All of us have different wants and needs from the workplace.
It's interesting. So when I was in my 20s and working in Washington, D.C., I remember getting my first laptop. And it was like a privilege to be issued a laptop in addition to my desktop, because I loved the ability to take the parts of work that I didn't want to spend doing in the office, email, like the great curse of modern society. I didn't want to do that during the day. I was on the Hill, I was in meetings, I was in internal meetings. And so it gave me freedom. And I still try and capture that feeling that the ability to work remotely should have that feeling of freedom associated with it, and as much as it carries a responsibility or an obligation with it. But I never would have thought at that point in my life at 27, 28 years old of working full time from my apartment. I like being out amongst people. That's where I get my energy from. Other people don't. I respect that, but then let's clearly communicate what the options are, right? This role or this organization may not be for you if you don't want to show up.
Yeah.
5 days a week. And I think that's fine.
So, what I tell you what, you told me a story in the prep, which you need to share, which is the story about your daughter with open heart surgery, and
Oh
you
my
were
God.
making a call.
I'm going to see if I can find this picture. I'll tell you the story while I look for this picture, because I got to scroll back nearly 7 years here on my phone. My daughter was diagnosed 21 weeks in utero with something called tetralogy of Fallot. Tetralogy of Fallot includes 4 heart symptoms, the primary of which is a moderate to large size hole between the left and right ventricle. It generally also involves some sort of damage or misplacement either to the pulmonary outflow tract or to the pulmonary artery. Fortunately, the pressure in my daughter's heart was balanced. In other words, the oxygenated and unoxygenated blood was mostly staying on the right and left side correctly and wasn't overly mixing. And fortunately, her outflow track was compromised but operational. And so it wasn't a severe case. When she was 14 weeks old, she needed to have open heart surgery. Ultimately, the pressure was going to get imbalanced, and ultimately, the damage to the outflow tract was going to become compromising. And so they go in and they patch the hole, and they either realign the pulmonary outflow tract or repair the pulmonary valve. In some cases, they have to put in a substitute. My daughter, they were able to save all of her original anatomy, which is great. But when you've got a 14-week-year-old, I mean, she's 14 weeks old, she's going in for open heart surgery, like that needed to be my priority. And at the time that that happened, I did not qualify for leave. I think your viewers in the United States of America will understand this. Everybody else, it will be a big question mark. But in order to qualify for unpaid FMLA in the United States, you need to be working for a year. And I was only with that company for 3 months. It was never an issue or ever a question for me to be able to take that time off and to be where I needed to be, which was great and a gift from, it wasn't unique to my position. My employer would have done that for any of more than 100,000 employees, because that was the culture of the company that I worked for. This is us on. Can we see this? How close can I get this?
Yeah,
This
it's
is
brilliant.
me with my 14-week-old daughter
Mhm.
and my Cher concert T-shirt, because of course,
Yeah.
the day I brought her home from the hospital. This was 3 days after the surgery. And I mean, the surgery was done. It was a success. She was fine. They kept her under observation for a couple of days until let the wound drain and heal. And then we were scheduled to bring her home. And I was at the hospital, and it was just going to be hours of waiting. 60 minutes before that picture was taken, I was on the phone with one of the largest athletic footwear and apparel retailers in the world, having a conversation about the transformation of their global supply chain. They didn't care that I wasn't on site. They didn't care that I wasn't on camera. I was completely transparent about what was going on. They, of course, volunteered to reschedule the call, but there was no purpose. She was fine. There was nothing else that needed to be done but waiting. And I like to work. And so I was able to do my job and be there for my daughter at the same time. It wasn't because of my experience. It wasn't because of my seniority. It was simply because of the fact that I was a human being. And so as a leader, I'm committed to creating those opportunities for everybody on my team, right? You have to have the ability to live your life. Otherwise, I'm not going to get out of you what I need to get out of you at work. So if I don't put that first, I'm going to suffer anyway. But I'll also clearly communicate expectations, right? I still believe there are certain roles where I either want you in an office 1 week a month to do the enablement and the call blitzes and the training, or I want you in the office 3 days a week because it's good for your career development to be around your peer group and to work in that environment. And so I try and communicate the expectations up front, but I also know that if we don't accommodate the way that people need to live, they're going to take their business across the street, and they should.
And I think that's for me, that was to start this conversation. I mean, we're at 20 minutes now, to start this conversation, what we're saying is that there is work life, we need to balance things going on in our life, but that doesn't mean that we're not working.
No.
And we still have a whole bunch of things that we need to be doing to move ourselves forward and to move the organization forward.
I remember very, very clearly. I had one team member. We had our forecast calls going back years. We had our forecast calls on Friday morning, and I'm a big believer that if it's not in the system, it's not real.
Okay, yeah.
And at least 50% of the time, CRM wasn't accurate. It hadn't been updated. Now, everybody works differently, right? Particularly with the access to digital technology, Wi-Fi that we have now. Some people do it 5 minutes after the meeting is over and everything's updated in near real time. Others sit down once a week and do it. Now, I'm going back into the early 2000s. This is before Wi-Fi on planes. This is before the pervasiveness of Wi-Fi. I remember checking into a hotel and you had to get the Cat5 wire out of the closet and plug it into
or pay $20-$30 just to check your emails. Yeah.
Right. So we're going back 20 years here, and this team member had the largest geographic territory, because we're very, very concentrated here on the East Coast of the United States, but we're very, very spread out in the Western United States. And I remember having a conversation with this employee to say, CRM is never updated for Friday morning forecast calls. And she said to me, that's because I'm often traveling on an airplane to get home on Thursday nights after having been gone all week. And so I can't make the updates until Friday, and our calls for me are at 6 o'clock in the morning. And it was such I'm such an effing idiot moment that I have this most talented player on my team, right? And I'm running a forecast call at 6 a.m. on a Friday for her, which comes hot on the heels of her traveling home on a Thursday after a week on the road after covering this huge territory. We moved the forecast call. That was the easy answer. But 20 years ago, as the first-time sales manager, I didn't get it.
Andrew's made a great comment. It's a massive culture change to be able to work from home. You do get more work done, but at times it's the individual relationship with colleagues that do suffer.
And I think that we need to understand that individual relationships with colleagues, conflict resolution. So I'm a big fan of Patrick Lencioni's books. His most famous is The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. There are others. My favorite is The 6 Types of Working Genius.
Yeah, great book.
And I'm a big adherent to his philosophy that teams become dysfunctional if they cannot be vulnerable in front of each other, if they don't have enough trust to raise productive conflict, to resolve business issues, if they're unwilling to commit to a common set of business results, if they're unwilling to hold each other accountable, and if they don't pay attention to business results on an ongoing basis after agreeing to how they're going to keep score. And so I take issue with the concept of being more productive, but sacrificing relationships, because relationships are a big part of work productivity. You know, most of us have passed the age of, you know, sitting at sewing machines doing piecework, or going down into the mines. And so for those of us that are not performing jobs like that, I think we really need to recognize. I think we really need to recognize that the relationships themselves are part of being productive at work.
Eric, thank you so much for coming on today and talking about this. I think, yeah, I think there's something that we can all learn from this, and you know, from the comments that have come from the audience, clearly that people have been listening very intently. Thank you so much for sharing it. Remind people where they can get hold of you.
You can get hold of me on LinkedIn, Eric Stine, Stine. And if you want to connect directly, just send me a message. I respond to them all.
And thank you so much for coming on again, Eric. I really appreciate you.
It was absolutely my pleasure.